Hey everyone, welcome to a Keto and Crime Classic. Today we've got the case of G.I. Joe Gliniewicz, the G.I. Joe of the Chicagoland suburbs. This is him. He was not only a military veteran, but also a 30-year veteran of being a police officer near the Chicago suburbs of Fox Lake. He ran their local youth police officer training program and basically was an all-around good guy until one morning in 2015 when he was allegedly shot by some perpetrators. And after an investigation, it was revealed that not only was it a suicide, it was done to hide a legacy of corruption and scams and a not so nice person that was underneath the facade. I found this a very hard one to report on because I do have police officers in my family, and we are a police officer family, but cops do go bad, just like anyone else. They're human after all, and so this one is a blight on the blue for sure. But I thought it was worth another look into, and with that being said, 2019 Tracy is going to tell you about the 2015 case of G.I. Joe Gliniewicz.
Officer was gunned down, the fourth in just over a week. This time it was in the suburbs of Chicago. And here's Anna Werner.
Scores of officers from at least 6 federal and state law enforcement agencies fanned out to search by air and by land, looking for 3 men suspected of killing 52-year-old Fox Lake Police Lieutenant Charles Joseph Gliniewicz.
Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime on YouTube, the Keto Comic on BitChute, and Thought Crime via Podcast Land. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we have got a very interesting case, the case of G.I. Joe Gliniewicz. This was a case of a corrupt cop that went very, very wrong, and this one's hard for me to do because I come from a military and law enforcement family, so I believe that our armed services and our men and women in blue are heroes. So this is very hard for me to do because as much as I believe 90% of them are good and they just want to serve the public good, there is that 10, maybe 15%, I may be being generous there, that is absolutely corrupt and absolutely out for themselves and absolutely practices racism and sexism and all those bad isms that we hear about. I don't deny that those things happen, but I like to believe they are at a minimum. But this is a case that shows just how bad a cop can get. So let's get into it, shall we? Charles Joseph Gliniewicz was born to Joseph and Debbie McLean Gliniewicz August 25th, 1963 in Libertyville, Illinois, which is just outside of Chicago, about 40 miles outside of Chicago. He grew up there his entire life in the Midwest, was your typical, Midwestern boy, loved football, loved sports, loved law enforcement, and loved the military. It was his dream to grow up and join the Army and be a soldier, and that's exactly what he ended up doing. He came from your normal middle-class family. His parents did divorce. Both of them remarried, and he did have stepbrothers and half-siblings as a result of an extended blended family. So he ended up attending Antioch Community High School because even though he was born in Libertyville, they lived the majority of their life in Antioch, which again was just outside of Chicago. He attended Antioch Community High School, was an athlete, member of the ROTC there, as well as a decent student, your normal C+, B average GPA student. So he then went on to obtain both a bachelor's and master's degree in criminal justice from Kaplan University. Kaplan University, if you did not know, is a for-profit college, and if you're interested in all the hoopla behind for-profit colleges, I have a video on it on my channel. I'll link it below. These are not exactly held in high regard lots of times. Kaplan has a better name than most because they are known for their test prep. The MCATs, the LSATs, the SAT, the ACT, they have prep courses that are world-renowned and are regarded very highly. But their colleges, not so much, but I'm not downing on them. They are one of the few of these colleges that were regionally accredited instead of nationally accredited, and they have both on-campus and online program, so there was really no indication of which one Joe attended, because they don't disseminate between that. Your transcripts don't really allude to that, so whether or not he attended on campus or online is unbeknownst. I would imagine most of it was probably online because of his military service. He did join the U.S. Army Reserves in 1981. He served with them from 1981 to 2007. He was heavily decorated, including a drill sergeant's badge, meritorious service, just heavily decorated, very well respected. He was eventually discharged honorably from the Army Reserves in 2007 with the rank of first sergeant. While still in the Army Reserves, the Army Reserves serve, 1 weekend a month, a certain length of time during the summer, and then they can be activated as active service during times of war. I don't know if he ever served combat. I really couldn't find that, but I do know that he was in there. He was an outstanding firearm instructor, drill sergeant, and helped with the MPs. So he was very well respected. And during that time, he relocated to Fox Lake, Illinois. Again, this was outside of Chicago, another suburb, but it was a resort town. It was heavily integrated into the Great Lakes, so a lot of people went there for vacation and things like that. It was a little village. It really wasn't even a town. It was a village. It was incorporated as a village, so it was very small. And Joe became something of a hero there when he joined their police force in 1985. He rose quickly through the ranks, starting out as a K-9 officer, and then spending some time on the SWAT team, and then being elevated to the rank of lieutenant eventually, and taking over the much coveted Explorers program. Now, the Explorers program was, think of the Boy Scouts, but for the police. These were young men and women that sought out that wanted to be police officers. And they joined this, basically the equivalent of an junior ROTC program for police officers. These are usually sponsored by American Legion posts, but this one was sponsored by the actual police department, and they got training from Joe. He was elevated to head of that in 1987, and he trained these people unlike any other Explorer program around the country did. Usually they got training in police codes, some research, some detective skills, things like that, traffic stops and whatnot. But Joe drilled them to the point that they were trained in SWAT tactics, officer down tactics. It was almost like a mini militia, the way he trained them. And the way this program worked, if a young man or woman passes through it and their instructor signs off that they did a good job, they usually get advanced standing in a police academy class. So they usually can pass through much quicker into the academy. Through the academy as a result of being part of this. And he was the head of this, and we'll come back to that because this plays into it heavily. He married Melody Restar in 1989, and they had 4 sons: Joseph, Donald, also known as DJ, he will play an important part in this, Jeffrey, and David. And here are some pictures for those of you watching via video of the couple, of the children, and Joe and his wife and oldest son, DJ, who would eventually go on to join the U.S. Army, just like his dad. He became a sergeant around the same time he was promoted to being head of the Explorers. And part of that was raising funds for it. So he went out and, had fundraisers, car washers who would just go into local businesses and ask for money. And he was collecting, $200, $300, $500 donations from businesses and people. And lots of times he would tell them to make the checks out to him, not the Explorers specifically. Also, because of his Army Reserve connections, he was able to reach out to the military's fund where they send unused equipment to police forces that may need it around the country. And he was able to fill out requisitions form for Fox Lake. But instead of sending those things to the police department, he would take them for the Explorers program, and he would have them mailed to their headquarters there, to his warehouse where he trained, because he had his own setup separate from the police precinct, where he could trained these young people, and he would have all that stuff sent to them, and he was just stocking it up instead of sending it over to the police force where it was actually needed. So that's how these children were subjected to the military style training that they were getting, where other Explorer programs didn't get that much. So he did a tremendous job getting supplies and fundraising for them. He had a separate bank account for the Explorers, but temptation got the better of him, and soon he and his wife, allegedly his wife, were dipping into those Explorer accounts. They were writing checks for their mortgage payment, for his mortgage payment, for subscriptions to gyms, adult websites. They were taking vacations, paying off credit card bills, all with checks written out of one of 5 Explorer fund bank accounts, as well as taking out cash and making withdrawals and transferring that money to their personal accounts. So there was a lot of misuse of funds because he was getting all this huge amount of equipment sent to him by the military. That's our tax money right there, by the way. Sent to him that he was using instead of having to purchase things. He had this fundraising money, freed up to do what he wanted to with it, and he did. And in a small town like Fox Lake, he was a American hero. He was a vet. He was a well-decorated police officer that rose from sergeant to lieutenant very quickly. He was already making a salary of like $96,000 a year. Now that's in the Chicagoland area, so that's not as much as it would seem, but it's still a good chunk of change. So he was using that to supplement his income and keep his family in a lifestyle that they had become accustomed to. So he was very much a hero, so he got a lot of respect, and it was fairly easy for him to raise these monies. Also, because of his status as being one of the few lieutenants on the force, he kind of operated outside the scope of anyone. He was friends with the mayor, he was friends with the police chief, and he was sort of like an acting assistant chief, so the police chief depended on him a great deal. So he wasn't supervised, and no one kind of went behind him checking. Remember when we talked about Rita Crunwell? One of the major issues with that is there was no checks and balances. The same here. No one checked up on G.I. Joe, so he was kind of free to do what he wanted to do without fear of repercussion. Now let's get into his sexual improprieties. Now this is alleged. One part of it we know happened. The second part is still in dispute, so I want to make that known. But he received some official reprimands in his record that weren't brought to light until after the investigation after his death. But he had been noted as basically using quid pro quo tactics on female police officers, offering to help them get promoted and raises based on what they were willing to do for him. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So there was well-documented cases of that happening in his record, which I don't understand how he was promoted to lieutenant, though this is a very small town again, and I guess the good old boy and good old girl system flourishes just about everywhere, especially in small town America. So he was able to kind of get around that. Also, he had been noted as threatening a female dispatcher that got into an argument with him over something. Basically, she sent him on a call that he didn't want to do. And he basically told her in a joking manner, that he wanted to put some bullets in her chest as a result. Well, the dispatcher didn't exactly feel good about that, and she reported it. And then after it was reported and he was investigated, he was noted as coming in the dispatch center when she was working and standing there playing with his gun, which is highly, highly suspect that a police officer would play with his firearm, because I know military and police officers, you just don't do that. So he was kind of standing there in front of her playing with his firearm as a way of intimidating her. At least that's what she felt. And she did report these things. But again, swept under the rug, good old boy, G.I. Joe, real American hero. Probably the most damaging sexual allegations came as a result of Katie Brown, who is a young woman in the explorer program who excelled and got great marks. This is a picture of her in later years here. She also dated his oldest son, his second oldest son, DJ, and was alleged to have had an affair with Joe while she was an explorer, although she denies that to this day. But in 2013, even though her and DJ had split up, DJ joined the Army Reserves. And Joe knew the Army Reserves, and he knew that the stipend that they give Army Reservists is higher if they're married. So basically, he arranged for Katie to marry his son DJ, so his son DJ would get a higher monthly stipend. And whether or not he paid Katie off physically or with money, we don't know. But this part was proven that she did marry DJ just so that he can get a higher stipend from the Army Reserves. In 2013, she married him. He joined the Army Reserves. They stayed married in name only. She said it was never consummated until 2014 when they divorced. So DJ got more money for being a reservist as a result of being married because they assume you have a family to support. So, and Joe arranged all of that. And then there were more allegations that she went on to having an affair with Joe, even when they were married and after they were divorced. But she still denies that. That part has never been proven, but it just, I think, speaks to his character because we already see what's in his police record at this time. So, am I inclined to believe it? Yeah, I am inclined to believe there was something going on there. Because to convince a young lady to commit fraud against the U.S. government, you got to be paying them with something. That's all I'm saying. I ain't never wanted to do that bad in my life. Of course, I don't want to do much at all anyway, but I'm not a good person. Good gauge of that, but yeah. Draw your own conclusions. Don't come after me, Katie. Along this time, Fox Lake was starting to kind of tighten up their administrative procedures. Around 2014, they brought in a brand new village manager by the name of Ann Marin, and Ann Marin was a no-nonsense kind of gal. She wanted to know exactly where all of the money was going, and so she started auditing every department. And when she got to the police force, she realized that over here, under G.I. Joe's sole supervision, there was this whole detachment part of the police force in the Explorers program that had absolutely no oversight except for the man that ran it. And so she started asking questions. And Joe started freaking out and kind of talking some wild shit around town about how he was concerned for his job and stuff like that, that she was out to get him. During this time, it was also noted in his police file that he started drinking very heavily, got into some bouts with public intoxication that were all swept under the rug. He also started applying for police chief jobs in surrounding towns and cities to get out of the force over there, I guess to get out from under what he considered was the bullying that Ann Marin was putting him through. But August 30th, 2015, Ann Marin contacted him and said that she wanted a full audit of the bank accounts and the equipment stores of the Explorer program so she could balance them against what was coming in. Because what was happening, he was getting all this stuff donated from the military for Fox Lake. He was sending some of it to Fox Lake, which came in, but he was keeping the majority of it. Now, whether he was using it or selling it, we don't know. No one, that's never been proven, but it was there. So she was getting these invoices for these small amounts of equipment. When she ordered invoices from the military to see what actually came in, there was a lot more on there. So she wanted to know what was going on with that. So she asked Joe for a full audit of the Explorer stores and bank accounts. And this is where the story gets really spicy. September 1st, Joe goes to work as normal. He was expected to be on his post, either at the American Legion or at the police headquarters by 8 a.m. every morning. He stopped, was his normal duty, was his normal habit. He stopped and got gas, went into the gas station convenience store, purchased cigarettes and coffee. As he normally did, he spoke to a few people. Somebody playfully asked him if he could play with his gun. Joe, in his normal military lingo, said negative, and it was just a normal day. While in town, it was noted that Joe noticed 2 white boys and one black boy walking along a town street. These men were actually proven later had actually just came from a bank ATM where they withdrew money enough to get breakfast to go to the local diner and eat. And that was proven later with ATM receipts and other things. But he noticed these people. It was noted that he actually looked and pointed them out, that he didn't really know who they were. So he got back into his car and continued toward his post at the American Legion, because he was indeed going to do the audit as instructed by Miss Marin, who's, for those of you on video, is pictured here. At 7:52 a.m., there was a radio call from Joe that came into the Fox Lake Dispatch saying that he was stopping at the abandoned cement plant, which led down to a local marsh area, because he saw 2 white men and 1 black man running from the cement plant to the back of the marsh. So he radioed at that time. He saw 3 suspicious people he was going to investigate. The dispatcher asked him at that time, "Would you like me to send backup?" He said negative. So a few minutes later, he again radioed saying that he was following them down the road toward the swamp that they had ran when he engaged them. And at that time, the dispatcher asked again, "Do you want backup?" And at that point, he actually answered, "Yes, get somebody en route." So 2 more police cars pulled up. Joe followed them into the swamp. While there, the investigating police officers swept the area. One of them started walking the road, the gravel road that led from the plant down to the marsh. And at that time, they were trying to radio Joe, no answer. They tried to call his cell phone, no answer. And halfway down the path, the first investigating police officer saw what appeared to be a police officer's pepper spray discarded in the grass. A few feet later, he found a nightstick, also discarded, so it looks like there had been some sort of struggle and some things had been thrown about. And then further down the path, he found, next to the actual marsh itself, the body of G.I. Joe Gliniewicz, Lieutenant G.I. Joe Gliniewicz, face down in the grass. He immediately called for backup with that horrible phrase, "Officer down," and went to investigate. When he rolled Joe over, he saw blood coming out from under Joe's bulletproof vest, which he still had on, and he was deceased. He looked all around for Joe's firearm, could not find it, so he could only assume whoever shot the officer had the gun. So he radioed in that there were, for the same 3 suspects that Joe had been following, to please be mindful that they're probably armed and dangerous and have killed a police officer. So within minutes, the place was a war zone. It was taped off. You had police forces from all over Chicagoland coming in to investigate, and this was an all-day search. Every inch of that swamp was searched, and no one ever found a sign of any men at all. So the investigation continued on. Mayl Gliniewicz, his wife, was informed that her husband was killed in the line of duty. She was, of course, distraught, and people started putting up signs in memoriam. The governor of Illinois ordered all flags at half-mast. The media descended on it because this was a cop killing. This came on the heels of Ferguson, Missouri, and other bad cop incidents, although this at the time wasn't a bad cop incident. And because of that, you had a lot of political pundits saying this was the part of, was kind of like a war on police officers, that Lieutenant Gliniewicz was the victim of a war on police officers that our then President Obama had not done anything about, and he blamed Black Lives Matter because one of the suspects wanted in this was a black man. So all this racial tension started, all this talk about a war on police, blue lives matter, black lives matter, all lives matter, what have you. It started all of this political rendigo. And in the meantime, an investigation of exactly what happened was started. The coroner at the time, now Joe had just put in for retirement. He was 1 month away from retirement. So his wife could have received his full pension if he had actually been killed in the line of duty. So that's why the police were investigating so heavily, not just on the crime side, but on the administrative side, to see if there was any other foul play here. And the coroner started to raise some suspicions because of the location of Joe's wound. There were 2 gunshots on Joe's body, one on his left side, which only caused bruising, and then the actual kill shot, which was basically just a few inches down in his vest. It looked as though to the coroner that somebody had actually tackled him perhaps and shoved the gun down under his bulletproof vest to actually kill him, which basically blew out his his aorta and caused him to bleed to death. So there was a lot of gabbing back and forth internally about this looks fishy. Also, along this time, a nationwide manhunt for these 3 suspects. There was a call 3 days after it happened from a woman saying that she saw 2 young white men and 1 young black man in hoodies running in the parking lot of Walmart from an abandoned car. It looked suspicious. The police put out a manhunt, and they never found anyone because it came out 2 days later that that was a false police report put out by an idiot and a crazy person, I guess, that just wanted some attention. And she was actually charged with filing a false police report and creating a public nuisance and was placed in jail. So there was a lot of weirdness about this. So eventually enter a former Chicago police officer, 𝗳𝗲𝗁𝗁. Now, he is not a crystal clean person. If you just YouTube his name, you'll see where he's been involved in some slimy activities, but he also knew Joe. And there's been some suspect that maybe they were involved in some of the use of this money from the Explorers program. But he started contending by September 13th that this wasn't a murder, that this was a planned suicide or assisted suicide. And eventually in late September, the coroner put out the same theory, that this was not killed in the line of duty, this was killed by his own hand.
But yesterday, that revelation, Joe Gliniewicz had staged his own death, shooting himself twice in the chest, over and under his bulletproof vest.
Gliniewicz committed the ultimate betrayal.
Police say he thought the new city administrator, 𝗂𝗏 was about to expose him as a thief, stealing thousands from that youth program he ran with his wife. In text messages to an unidentified person, Gliniewicz wrote, "She hates me, and she has now demanded a complete inventory of the Explorer program."
The coroner put together, along with some police detectives, put together a rough sketch of what they thought happened. Gliniewicz made his 2 calls, one telling people where he was, the other one telling them to send help. And then he started down the path toward the swamp. Now, one of their major triggers was the fact that he was still in perfect duty order, except for the pepper spray and the nightstick that had been thrown to the side. His uniform was pristine except for the blood. It was still well tucked. His bulletproof vest was still in place. And so that was their first indication that there wasn't a fight. For any of you that have seen my video on Jeffrey McDonald, again, the area in the living room where he said a fight took place wasn't messed up to the degree that a real fight would cause. Same here. His uniform was still in perfect working condition. So he put together a theory of what happened. He started down the path. He took out his pepper spray. He unlocked it and he engaged it once, threw it away so it looked like it had been used. He also took out his nightstick, threw it further down the path because the only fingerprints on any of those things were Gliniewicz's. Further down the path, he took his service revolver and he shot himself in the side with the gun, hoping to wound himself, I suppose. I don't know, maybe if the suicide was an afterthought, that he thought he could just maybe get out from under this audit by being wounded in the line of duty, so he attempted to wound himself. and it didn't work. It only bruised him because his utility belt and the bulletproof vest was just enough to stop the bullet. It only caused some deep bruising. And at that time, Gliniewicz made his final radio call to send help, that he was going to the swamp. At that time, he said whether it was planned or whether he decided, well, I can't wound myself and make it look believable, I might as well just kill myself and get out from under it. We don't know. But he theorizes that whatever the plan was, at that point, Gliniewicz took his service revolver, stuck it down his bulletproof vest, and shot himself where he knew he would puncture the aorta. And at that time, Gliniewicz took his service revolver, probably threw it into the lake, fell over and died. And that is the theory put forth by the coroner. After they drug the lake, they did find his service revolver in the water. Also, as part of the investigation, a series of texts between Gliniewicz and an unknown person at that time, only to be identified later as his wife, Mel. The texts that were deleted from both their phones, but they were able to go to their service provider and get a printout of all the texts. 6,500 pages, not 6,500 texts, 6,500 pages of normal printer paper full of text were found, and they read through all of them. And what they found was evidence that Gliniewicz was nervous about the audit. He had said in many texts that if she checks the old bank accounts, I'm effed. If she comes in and sees the inventory and compares them against the invoices, I'm effed. So I think he knew he was going. He even texted his son DJ in one of the texts saying, if we don't get some money back into the Explorer bank account, you're going to be visiting me in jail. So there was a bunch of texts showing where they were going to start funneling money that they got from the Army Reserve and from his salary and from odd jobs back into the account to make it look legit, and all that money was still there. But because of the lack of time, Joe got more and more nervous and more scared. And there was even a few texts, although it was never proven that he actually did it, there was texts where he actually considered having the leader of a well-known motorcycle gang that he was affiliated with kill Miss Marin. But it was never proven that that conversation actually took place. It was only a text where he was talking about the possibility of doing it. And his day-long funeral, where people from all over the state came in, was declared a farce. Signs that were in memoriam to him started getting defaced around town. And finally, on January 27th, 2016, his wife was indicted on 4 counts of dispersing charitable funds for personal benefits, 2 counts of money laundering because of the texts.
Wife of the now discredited Illinois Police Lieutenant Charles Joseph Gliniewicz has been herself charged with embezzlement-related crimes. Her husband was known as G.I. Joe. He died in September, and his death sparked a weeks-long manhunt for 3 men suspected of shooting him. That hunt came to an end when investigators concluded Gliniewicz staged his own death. Investigators say the cop killed himself to cover up years of corruption. They say he stole tens of thousands of dollars from a youth group he led. And he spent that money on mortgage payments, travel, gym memberships. At the time of his death, he was set to retire in a month after working for the department for more than 30 years.
Even if she didn't know about it at first, she found out about it later and should have reported at that time. To date, his son DJ has not been implicated in anything, and his case for fraud against the U.S. government for a false marriage was turned over to his commanding officer. There's no word on what happened with that. Probably nothing. And Joe Gliniewicz's pension was cut in half because normally she would have received a full $96,000 salary for life in lieu of her husband's death. But that was cut by at least 20. I said half, but cut by at least 25% as a result. And in addition to that, all her funds were frozen for about 6 months. And her lawyer did in late 2016 or mid 2016 file a motion to get those released to her because she was falling into poverty. $40,000 was released, enough to pay off her house and get her caught up, but the rest of it remained frozen until later in 2017 when it was finally unfrozen, pending the outcome of her trial. To date, her trial is still in limbo as there's been appeal after appeal, motion after motion filed. The latest update I could find was May of 2019, where it's still pending some motions from the judge. So it may still be years before we know what the outcome of her trial is. And that's the story of G.I. Joe Gliniewicz. What do you think? Crooked cop or victim of circumstance? Anyway, guys, let me know what you think. I appreciate you. Like, comment, share, subscribe. And until next time, Keto Comic out.